advanced chemistry with practical approaches. And as we know that from continuously we are working on supporting the sustainability and transforming education. And keeping this imperative in the mind, Frizzle Foundation has started advanced training program. Since last month, we have completed our first module on novel drug delivery system. And this is our second module on chemistry part. Here, I would like to, we have various sessions, 4 days. First, today we have a very eminent personality with us, Dr. Mukund Chorgade sir. He is going to cover process chemistry. Tomorrow we have Dr. Karthikeyan sir. He is going to cover drug discovery part. I'm just sharing the slide. Is it? I think. So this tomorrow we have the session on the drug discovery, and then Mr. Murari has from Tata Memorial. He is going to cover the the evaluation change from chromatography to HPLC practice and its application. And then the last day we have a session on NMR spectroscopy by Dr. Kiran Jathar. She is from Bandra. So during this 4 day period, we have the sessions with eminent personalities. Apart from that, we are just going to give a daily test series, and on that chemistry society, American Association for Advancement of Science. He is also a fellow member of Royal Society of Chemistry and Indian Society for Chemistry and Biology. He is also an adjunct research professor, visiting fellow, scientific appointments at Harvard, MIT, and various universities. He has been a recipient of three Scientist of the Year award. He has been honored by election as a fellow of ACS, AAAS, AIS, and various associations. He is featured speaker in several national international symposia. He is certified CGLP and CGMP professionals, and he has his he has his hello. Am I audible, sir?
Thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate this. So should I now be sharing my screen and everything will go live then? So can you enable screen sharing now? Can you enable screen sharing?
अपकमिंग मंथ में भी खाली
वो ही आएंगे 5,000
आधी आधी आएगी। आ गए तो
Okay, is my screen visible now? Thank you very much indeed. How about now? Okay, lovely. Well, thank you very much, Professor Preeti. I really appreciate this very kind introduction, and arguably it's the first time that somebody took the trouble of making a couple of slides. And the slides have come out well, so I'm quite honored I found out all the nice things I've done myself. Uh, just to tell you a brief bit about what this whole field of process chemistry and all that is about. And as was described in the introduction, and by the way, it was a very nice one because sometimes people they almost make a introduction almost the same thing as an obituary. So this one was particularly good and particularly profound. So now it's up to me to live up to my billing. So what are we involved in both in American Chemical Society and all these organizations that you are indeed seeing here? We are here to describe and develop the science of process chemistry. Now, very paradoxically, this was not a very developed art and science, particularly in the United States and Europe, because there was always a feeling in the pharmaceutical industry in particular that we really don't need to do process chemistry because the prices of drugs are not regulated, and there is a human sort of compulsion that whenever you start, your family member is ill or anything like that, you are willing to pay absolutely any price. Preeti ji, I hope this is being recorded. I think you can take that particular action on your own, and then we can share this very nicely. Okay. So, in the old days, if you will, there was a feeling that if your family member or anybody is ill, you will pay any price. You will have any financial hardship to make your family member better. And in all the Marathi and Hindi movies also, the thing was, Dr. Sahab, I will write you a blank check, just cure my family member or whatever ails them. So process chemistry, which is the art and science of actually designing very efficient processes, was never really developed. But since then, there have been many, many cultural transitions. Let me illustrate a little bit about what has driven some of this one. Now, we always had a feeling that the pharmaceutical industry was particularly refined in the science that we did. It was always regarded as the second only to academia. But this was a famous slide from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Everybody started getting very hooked on to amoxicillin and drugs like that at a very young age. Then we went to the ages of 4 to 12. Everybody started prescribing attention deficit disorder drugs, and many patients would actually, many parents of kids would go to the doctor and simply demand a prescription for this. Then you went to high school and all, you wanted to look good, so you took some appetite suppressants. Then you went to 18 to 24, you were in college, you were doing graduate work, and they took no dose tablets officially to study late and so on. Maybe some people engaged in little late night partying, and that's fine. Then you started balancing the pressures of family and career by taking, now it's called chronologically gifted, which is more politically correct. I'm certainly in that age group, so I endorse it. And then above 65, there are too many patients taking too many drugs. The average American, for example, takes between 10 to between 12 to 19 drugs. But the cost of these drugs has become increasingly important. And simply because, the Americans used to be. Now, there's a fundamental difference between the way drugs are used in America and England and so on. So let's say that you are suffering from some fever, you are prescribed a typical dose of antibiotics, which is 3 tablets a day for 10 days. And the Americans usually start taking double and then do their work so that they are afraid the boss should not miss them. In India, we had a different attitude. We took it. Then the general attitude was, "Hey, why should I pay more money to these pharmacists and doctors and all that? So I will save these things for the next time I'm sick." But that was never a bright idea because it started engendering a lot of resistance. But some of the scenarios here are actually very true. Now, the art and science of process development, believe it or not, started in India. There were some initial efforts done, and the first big effort was done on SmithKline Beecham drug, which was cimetidine, which George Wellman and all publicized to a very good extent. And what essentially was done was they scaled up the sodium and liquid ammonia reaction to a very, very large scale, to the point where hundreds of thousands of people were benefiting from this particular drug. Now, when I said it's got started in India, what proof do I have for that? Well, remember, I went through that era. I got my master's degree in 73, and the Indian Prime Minister, Madam Indira Gandhi, suddenly decreed that the product patents are going to be invalid. India had no industry worth the name, not in pharmaceutical API production, not in anything else. And it was suddenly decided that we are going to resort to a lot of the WHO mechanisms of compulsory licensing, but in one fell swoop, they decided that the product patents are invalid. However, the Indian companies were tasked with the job and essentially to define a new process. And in those days, it was called the import substitution, where people would slowly start replacing many of the hard to get reagents, many of the toxic reagents, and all that by doing something in India, because most of the pharma companies were not going to sell you the drugs in India. They were afraid of no competitive pricing. People would regularly make statements like, "Ha, there is no money to be made in India." So, what are we doing? What are we going to do as a community of chemists? First thing, we are going to apply all the knowledge and wisdom we have learned. See, when we go through a bachelor's degree program, when we go to a master's degree, and so on, we soak up a lot of knowledge. But sometimes there is no opportunity to put it to good and creative use. Why not do it in process chemistry? We have to look for reagents and all that are cost effective. We have to always look at the raw material availability. And by the way, this has become something extraordinarily important right now. You are following all the changes in the pharmaceutical industry and other industries also. People talk about a lot on over dependence on China and so on. And so I believe in own way and so on. We have to choose our reagents and solvents very carefully. Of course, one of the drivers for that is the environmental pollution, and you have seen all the disasters that can befall that. Atom efficiency was a term coined by Professor Barry Trost, and you have to look at materials which are toxicity, availability, and cost. These become extraordinarily important things. Plant safety, today to the point where many people are devoting a lot of time and attention. It is not enough to say we had an accident in the plant and one poor operator just died. We have to teach people at a very fundamental level how to be safe. I mean, I unfortunately followed a case where a poor plant operator, he was carrying some tetrahydrofuran on his right shoulder, a whole gallon bottle, and then he passed and rounded a corner where somebody was using a welding and somebody was using a blowtorch. Well, of course, the tetrahydrofuran ignited, and eventually the poor gentleman was burnt, which is a disaster to happen. Same things happen here also in UCLA and so on. People were siphoning out some butyl lithium, and this poor woman spilled everything on herself. So she was set on fire, very accidentally, no doubt, but then the people tried to douse the fire by putting water, and that's the worst thing you can do. So potency, analytical method development, very, very critical. This is all part of a normal process chemist job, and one has to be particular about this analytical method development. One has to control the impurities to very, very, very precise levels. Chromatography versus crystallization is always something very important, because you really don't want to imbibe any pharmaceuticals which have silica gel in them. And then, of course, polymorphs, that's an interesting story in itself. Now, what happened in the Western world was that people could not set up these labs, and you can see on the slide the man in front says, well, here is the main plant, the back wing is where we handle all the government paperwork. Now, when I first made a 5 kilos of drug in Switzerland, it came with 9 kilos of documents. So maybe we should have done the billing in that. Now, what used to happen in many places, the medicinal chemists and other discovery people used to discover a process, they used to publish it, but it was very, very complex. It used a lot of esoteric reagents like butyl lithium, and the reaction conditions were incredibly draconian. I mean, imagine that you are told to do in a pilot plant scale. You have to start the reaction at minus 78 degrees, then you have to add the Weinreb amide over exactly 2 minutes, then allow the thing to warm to room temperature, then cool it again, and so on and so forth. And that's not a particularly easy thing to achieve. Whenever I have been given a process like that and people say, how long will it take to make you a ton of material? Well, my response has always been, if mommy helps me, I can do it. Otherwise, it's a very difficult transition. But the attitude of most managers was simply this. People said you got a few problems going from lab scale up to full scale commercial. The typical attitude of especially the business owners was, if you have a procedure on 10 milligram scale and you have to make a ton of it, you just multiply everything by 100,000 or whatever, and then you will get your product. Well, nothing can be farther from the truth. And this whole idea of building an Erlenmeyer flask that reaches the skies is just not very realistic. Now, when I got my master's degree from University of Pune, I might add that, yes, Sir John Conforth had won the Nobel Prize in chemistry, and of course his interview appeared, and he made some comments about process chemistry which are incredibly derogatory. It says you offer an elegant, difficult, and expensive process to an industrial chemist whose ideal is something to be carried out in a disused bathtub by a one-armed man who cannot read. Now, yeah, that's not the biggest motivating thing, but I'm happy to tell you that today the definition has changed very, very dramatically. So today, what is the raison d'etre for our existence as part of the chemical enterprise? We design and execute safe, efficient, and reproducible manufacturing processes for active pharmaceutical ingredients through a synergy, remember, between organic chemistry, analytical chemistry, and chemical engineering. So this is an extraordinarily important. Where do you typically use the skills of a process chemist? And this should be an object lesson for many of the young people who have just finished their master's degree. So this field is not restricted to the 10 people who have got a PhD that particular year. Everybody is involved, everybody should be involved, and people should be investing the time and effort. You typically start using process chemistry in preclinicals where you are doing the synthesis, but remember please, you are also collaborating with the formulation development. You are collaborating with the pharmacy, pharmaceutics people, pharmacology people, all of whom need reliable supplies of drugs. And then of course you are doing for discovery operations, you are doing animal tox, which is phenomenally important. You are also studying the drug metabolism. The art and science of scaling up metabolites is also something very, very relevant to the task at hand. Then eventually you transition the process you have developed to large scale manufacturing. Of course, please remember it is under very carefully controlled conditions. Now, here are the different phases of development. Now, the Indian enterprise has stayed away from most of these because we did not typically have a tradition of drug discovery. we always focused our attention on making things available, but this will give you a brief and preliminary idea. So what happens is, by the time you reach your drug discovery, the amount of drug you have to make first is 10 grams to about 10 kilos. And the site for that preparation is usually a kilo laboratories, and process chemists with all their training have a very beautiful chance and a very well defined sort of roles to contribute to that. Then you start increasing the scale up of this one. By the time you reach 100 kilos, this typically takes about a couple of years. You have then locked up the impurity profile, and your drug is necessary to go for further testing. Now, all the people doing bioequivalence and all that are very much involved in this, and then you reach this large scale production. Now, are the different steps? What are the factors that really determine the success or failure of a drug? Now, it is not just the reactors that you buy. It is not just the facilities and whether they are equipped with a cafeteria or not. It is ultimately the people. And there are people on this call, the people who are studying the sciences in universities and all that, whose technical and other skills have to be put to really good use. Now, what happens typically, and what has happened, especially in the Western world, where discovery, preclinical, and clinical are all simply separated into silos, and the people don't necessarily talk to each other. But there needs to be a very integrated effort at assay development, screening, everything from discovery to phase 4. People just have to talk and communicate with each other. I have, believe it or not, met people in the pilot plants and everything who says, "Oh, अपने को तो मालूम नहीं है, मेरा job है इसमें THF डाल देने का." And that does not frankly bode well for the future. The most important lesson I have been considering site, ever a good idea. Some of you may have some very good ideas about defining a new process, defining the impurity profile. Always check it out in the research laboratory first, and that too on a small scale. Now, let me give you a almost flawless example of this one. So this was a drug that was being attempted. It was already in phase 3 clinical trials. And what had happened was that we had about 480 kilos of this material all ready to go. That time it was a drug being attempted for asthma. Now, all of you do know that asthma sort of implies bronchoconstriction. Now, many people were saying that the capsules are going to be hard for people to swallow. And so overnight people said, well, then what is easier to swallow? It's a tablet. Oh, hello. So why is a tablet easier? Well, they are smaller and so on. So the senior vice presidents and all got together and they said, we are not doing capsules anymore. We are going to switch to making some tablets. Disaster that happened. So they immediately started running the tablet presses. Now all of you, especially in India, do know what that entails. And within a few hours, the report came back that there was 50% of a new impurity that was generated. Mark the important words. There was 50% of an unknown impurity which had enormous potential to be toxic. What levels does the FDA recommend that you regulate your impurities to? Ladies and gentlemen, the answer is about 0.15%. Now all of a sudden you have 50%. So of course everybody reacted in a panic. You had now lost this. But what do you do about the problem, and what mistake have you made? Well, you have used your manufacturing facility as a research lab. And then they summoned a SWAT team of chemists and all. There were about a dozen of us chemistry trained people. And then they described what they had done for the tablet presses. They had applied some pressure to make the tablets. Then all of a sudden, all of us chemists quickly realized that here is your diene, here is your dienophile, and that is all set to do what is a common reaction which we have all studied in our undergraduate days, and that is called as the Diels-Alder reaction. Now again, there was no integration between the chemists and chemical engineers, and all the people making the tablets. So see, this was the major impurity that was generated. The cost to Abbott and other places was prohibitive, and they were essentially also fined $400 million. So all this could have been avoided. Now, some of you have studied the Anastas Warner regimen and rules about green chemistry, and everybody is now taught those 12 rules as a matter of course, how you reduce the impurities, how you check out things. So green chemistry is the design, development, and implementation of chemical products and processes to eliminate all these side things that you are paid to entertain. So India became a gateway to international collaboration. I like that. Today when foreign visitors come, they don't come in through this gateway of India in Mumbai. They typically land at Chhatrapati Shivaji Airport and so on. But this is one of India's greatest success stories. So remember in 1994 or thereabouts, the whole world was in the throes of a major crisis due to AIDS and HIV protease. That time, they did the work which was originally done at Research Triangle Institute. They marketed a triple cocktail of zidovudine, thymidine, and stavudine. This was the well-known thing that patients were going to be treated with. Now, in America in the 1990s, this therapy would have cost $30,000 per person per year for life. Yeah, that's not exactly affordable to the rank and file person, even though you may be living in America. It is certainly not recommended or affordable even to people anywhere in the third world, be it India, China, and most certainly Africa. So this was the published synthesis. Now I'm not going to belabor the details of this, but you started with D-ribose and then went through several steps using some very difficult reagents. You have stannous tetrachloride, and then you did all this. Then you have HBr and pyridine, which I knew from my undergraduate days in Pune is a very difficult reagent to handle. And then you did a hydrogenation with, of course, with Rani nickel. Now, in those days, this reaction was being done on about 200 gram scale. It had never ever been scaled up, and even the people in the USA were facing certain problems. Now, what the World Health Organization did as part of the compulsory licensing, they came to India. They actually gave a grant to, at that time, the CSIR labs in India, and some work was indeed started at IICT in Hyderabad. Now, on the blackboard, people suggested that AZT be made at $350 a kilo. Those are international prices. This was a price target. Beta thymidine was available in the international markets at $150 per kilo. Now, God Almighty, what do you do with it? And there was Professor A.V. Ramarao along with our whole team there, which had Mukund Gurjar, J.S. Yam. So Professor Ramarao kind of brashly suggested, why not we use D-ribose at $50 per kilo? Now, automatically, the price will be reduced by at least eightfold because the price of the other sugar, which was, we were using D-ribose and Ramarao suggested using D-xylose. Now, it seemed a very logical thing in principle, but in those days, when we didn't have Google and when we didn't have the iPhones to do a quick search, what do you think the reaction of a typical chemist like me was, and pretty much all the other chemists? He said, sounds very interesting, but what exactly is the structure of D-xylose? You couldn't just visualize it or anything like that. So we found out, and the difference, now we started with D-ribosyl thymine, took it through this classical process, if you will. You tied in these two OH groups in the form of a cyclic ring, which was a cyclic carbonate. Then you invoked the ankymeric assistance of a nitrogen atom lone pair. You unraveled this epoxide, and then you elaborated the material to thymidine. What Professor Ramarao had immediately suggested was, why not use D-xylose? Now, when we checked out the structures, there was one immediate problem, but also a quick solution. Look at the stereochemistry of this OH, and look at the stereochemistry of the OH group in these xylose. Now you can clearly envision that they are in different directions almost. There's a different level of chirality that is affiliated with this one, and what is very nice and providential almost is now this OH group and this OH group, they are cis linked to each other. Therefore, you can tie that up in a cyclic carbonate. Well, lo and behold, we did this, and then the reaction proceeded very beautifully. We assigned a remarkable graduate student, Dr. Sista Lalita, to this particular project. Every reaction worked as well for the first time, and then it dissolved. And now the proof of the pudding is in the eating. This soon became available in countries like India for $3 per day. Now that is a remarkable contribution. It used to be available for 30,000 per patient per year for life. Now this became available at a much lower cost, and some of them were indeed subsidized by the governments because they felt that this is a nice, affordable. So chemistry success was always there, but what do you think happened? The pharmaceutical companies were not very thrilled about this one. Now, in those days, they decided where to launch this drug. India had a problem. India couldn't just do all the chemistry and simply say launch it ourselves. They decided that for political and other reasons, they would start the launch in the country of South Africa. Now, what was unique about South Africa? Well, they had just emerged from the throes of the apartheid regime, and Nelson Mandela had been elected the very first president of the republic. So he said, go ahead. So this drug was duly introduced in South Africa, but all the pharma companies filed a lawsuit against anybody and everybody who was involved in the development of this in India. Now they made one critical mistake. They made Nelson Mandela essentially a partner to the lawsuit. He became a co-defendant. Now that aroused so much fury and furor among all the activists in the world. I mean, there are some things you just don't do. Nelson Mandela was an international icon of peace and brotherhood and everything else that is good about it. And you don't just file a lawsuit against Mother Teresa and people like that, because these people have potential to do a lot of creative good. So the fury of the activists and the backlash that ensued made sure that all the pharmaceutical companies, and there were 39 of them, the lawsuit was withdrawn within 72 hours. So the drug is now available to everybody. I would tell you the same thing about the Astra process for omeprazole, because this was also another drug that was introduced in India by the then Astra. And the lead inventor of this was Professor Bengt Samuelson, and it started with colidine, then you did a tough oxidation with hydrogen peroxide, then you nitrated, then you displaced by an SN2 prime reaction, which installed the O-methyl group over there. Then you did another oxidation, you converted the methyl group to a hydroxymethyl group, and then treated with thionyl chloride to attach the second component of the material. Now, what do you think was the price in India? It was projected to be 80,000 rupees per patient. Clearly, that is not going to be a terribly affordable thing to combat ulcers and so on. So we came up with a new process. We realized that we don't need the methyl group here, and we had to find a much cheaper starting material, and we said we will simply install the hydroxymethyl group later on. So we followed through with some nice chemistry, and then we used the dimethyl sulfate and so on. We did not quite remove this one, and then we were able to treat with hydrogen peroxide instead of the magnesium peroxysulfate and all these materials, and we got omeprazole to the point where the drugs in India started becoming very, very cheap, and omeprazole was available for 2 or 3 rupees per dose, which was of course meaning a whole lot to a lot of people. I always get a satisfaction of seeing this. Now the next drug is something that I was very intimately involved with. I am given a lot of credit for being the inventor of the process, but there are some fun things I would like to share with you. So my grandmother, I used to always see, she was an epileptic. This drug came too late to help her in a way, but it still gives me a lot of emotional satisfaction to see this particular prescription being filled. When it was invented, it was the largest and best-selling anti-epileptic drug. But of course, in 2006, everything changed. We were replaced by Lyrica, and now the prescriptions for this have completely gone down. So now take a look at this drug. This was started in Copenhagen, Denmark. Then it was licensed out to Abbott Laboratories, and nobody had a process to make it. It involves a nipacotic acid residue. Then it has two thiophene rings in this particular juxtaposition, and then you will see this double bond and everything else. This is typically called as the finish. So the discovery route is forbiddingly complex. You involve a bromination which is not stereospecific, doesn't give you site-specific reaction. The bromine moves around everywhere. Then you treat with the lithiosalt, again that gives you the halogen dance. Then you treat with a gamma hydroxylactone, and that's a problematic reaction. This material is unstable. And then you treat it with HBr. So you get a complex mixture. It was described as a witch's brew once. You get a very complex mixture of an ene bromide, a tertiary alcohol, and then they noticed that they were forming a spirotetrahydrofuran. The yields were ridiculously low. This was 43%, this was 28%, this was 68%, and so on. So ultimately people made the drug. Now the next step involved you making the ethyl nipacotate in racemic form, then doing a chemical resolution with D-tartaric acid, taking that material and then freebasing it with aqueous sodium hydroxide. Now there were many problems inherent with this one. This R-methyl nipacotate is extraordinarily water soluble. It requires very large amounts of methylene chloride for extraction, and then at each step in the game you lose some value. Now this was particularly interesting to me because I saw a manifest where a French company called Interor was given the contract for making about 8 tons of this material, and we were obligated to go and visit and inspect them. Well, that whole company was no larger than the room I'm sitting in right now. They simply very cavalierly told me that we just outsourced it to India. When it comes from India, we put our label on it and send it to Chicago. So we came to India, and they said very nicely that, well, we don't make it here, we outsource it to China. When it comes here, we put our label and send it to France. उसके बाद में क्या होता है तो मालूम नहीं. Now, the last step is again very dauntingly complex. It involves very, very low yielding chemical reaction. So we can convert this bromide, we can dehydrate the tertiary alcohol and giving us this ene. But the next step is where all the disasters befall us. Remember, the R-ethyl nipacotate is not just a base. To do an E2 elimination reaction, it is also a very good nucleophile, and it can do a displacement of this, it can do an elimination, and you get this product, the desired one in 48% yield and the other one in 52% yield. Okay, then you hydrolyze and so on. Now, what do you think was the price projection of this particular drug? Well, the active pharma ingredient was going to cost $57,865 per kilo. And then it was thrown back into my group, and I said, well, what is your price projection? What should it be, what I'm aiming for? They said $1,000 a kilo and absolutely no more, because by then all the other value additions will occur. People will make tablets and capsules and so on, and you have to get this drug into a patient who needs it. Now take a look at how my group transpired. Now, so we did these remarkable reactions. Now Dr. Subhash Patel, now remember I was working in Chicago. Dr. Subhash Patel did a brilliant job on the first step. He figured out a regiospecific bromination, 99% yield. Then Dr. Ketan Patel replaced the lithium with magnesium, and he came up over here. And then we went back to Subhash, who said, this is good, this is stable, but may not be so stable to long-term storage or transport. So he, on an impulse, treated with ethanol. And then you managed to recrystallize. This was available in 99% yield. Now take a look. This had already been noticed by the medicinal chemist. They had done a flash chromatography and so on and so forth. Then you unravel this to give you the ene alcohol, and then you treat it with methane sulfonyl chloride. Remember, we had formidable problems with treating with the bromide, and now we have got this one. So this was the work of Dr. Hemant Patel. So you have a Subhash Patel, you have a Ketan Patel, you have a Subhash Patel again, Ramesh Patel, and then Hemant Patel. And finally, I had Dr. Mahendra Deshpande in my group. He came up with a remarkable idea. He said, Doctor, remember all the problems we had with freebasing. Why not we just put in the entire salt, beautifully crystalline material, straight into the reaction chemish. But let us make two changes. Let us do that freebasing on a very impromptu in situ basis. And that is what was achieved with anhydrous lithium carbonate. So it just freebased just enough of this to maintain the nucleophilicity to give you this displacement, but not enhance the base strength where you will typically get something else, which is what we are finding. Second thing we did was change the solvent to isopropyl acetate. Now, as a PhD student, as a postdoc, I had encountered these difficulties before with ethyl acetate, which was a common organic solvent. It was hard to dry. It was also hydrolytically unstable, so you always got a mixture of acetic acid and ethanol, which would completely demolish all my protecting groups, like many of them that you are aware of, tetrahydropyranil and so on. And then finally we did this hydrolysis, again with the help of this time Elaine Lee. Now, we were going to make it in the Abbott facilities in India. So when we came to India, we encountered a gentleman there who said, "Hi, I'm Harry Patel." I said, "Well, in Chicago, we've had a Hemant, Subhash and all. Now I'm coming to India, you're suddenly telling me you're Harry." I said, "Well, the world works in strange ways." Now, one day we encountered a massive problem. Our people came up with a new impurity that had lost a methyl group here. This happened on a Friday night. None of us were very pleased about it. But then we had to work on the weekend, backtracking to all the solvents and other intermediates, and we found that the supplier had made a mistake in the beginning. They had neglected to clean the reactor when they brominated thiophene before it. They didn't clean the reactor. That left enough of a residue of the bromothiophene instead of the bromomethylthiophene. And then the FDA required us to make 1 kilo of this, subject it to all the toxicology testing, and so on. Now, in the back of my mind, it was always there, made the regioisomers of thiagabine, because the methyl group and all can and should be explored because it can move around with sometimes very profound difficulties in the process. So I had a wonderful collaborator, Elaine Lee. Now, in those days, she had a bachelor's degree in chemistry. We assigned her this job. We used some of our chemistry. The major difficulty that was encountered was when she did this Grignard reaction, we generated a benzylic secondary hydroxyl group, which we then oxidize here. This compound was incredibly unstable, and the putative dimer was immediately formed, from which point it was completely refractory and impermeable to any other chemical treatment that we gave. Then we treated it with cyclopropyl magnesium bromide. Again, please remember this carbonyl is very deactivated because it is in a position where access to it is not facile. So this reaction proceeded only in 32% yield, and so on and so forth. Well, at the end of 1 week, Elaine had about 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of the final product in hand. Now, her task was, remember, to make a kilo. 80 milligrams of Now I said, Elaine, let's not worry about it. Let's order more of the cyclopropyl magnesium bromide. It'll come in on the weekend. It'll give us a chance to think. In Aldrich catalog at the time, there used to be some chemical structures at the bottom. One structure that leaped out at me, this was the only thing there, was this. Now that would solve all my problems, wouldn't it? So you would encounter this reaction very well, but you have already solved the problem of generating this material, oxidizing it, and then having a less hindered group here. So we immediately designed a synthesis. We ordered all the 1.2 kilos that was in their possession, and we did this Grignard. Then we used our own chemistry and got the material. This time we were able to make 1.1 kilos in 1 week. Now that's a far cry from the 80%. We got this remarkable stereospecificity, much to our obvious delight. 97% Z isomer. I then said, well, surely I can extrapolate this to all the other regioisomers. I will give you access to these slides, study them. But again, using this kind of chemistry, we could move the methyl group around. Again, we saw a very dramatic stereochemistry difference. Same thing with the 3,5-des methyl. You could design this chemistry very well. So, what happened with the price of the drug, by the way? The price of the drug, remember, it was 57,865 kilo. Now we brought it down to 565. So I met those goals. But we started making a lot of new materials, which we could hand back to the discovery chemists to test. So I coined the term process chemistry driven medicinal chemistry. All right, good stuff. And then it became time for me to give an IUPAC talk. We looked at the mechanism of the reaction. The traditional mechanism is a SN2 substitution nucleophilic bimolecular. But much to our dismay, we found out that the major product would be the E isomer, which is not what we wanted. So we did this reaction under a carbocation catalyzed SN1 mechanism. We got the right isomer, but then we also repeated the reaction under classical SN2, and of course we were able to get the right product. So this proved to be a gold mine for us. All of us got some nice awards and so on for it. Now this whole outsourcing, people talk, I'm trying to exploit the creativity and the beautiful chemistry done in India. But sometimes this word gets to be very pejorative and very politicized. Take a look at this slide. It says, come here and tell the man in Bangalore what you like for Christmas. Oh, I don't believe it. They've outsourced Santa. Nothing like that has happened. And then I ran some businesses where the outcome is shown on this slide. It's true that your order was for a camel, but we received so many changes from the technical department that it was not particularly useful. This represents the best and finest of Indian chemistry, done with Indian collaborators and so on. So this is a fantastic drug invented by a biotech company called as Cytomed, which was based in Boston. They had a very well-known professor associated with them. He was Professor T.Y. Chen. Now remember earlier where people generated a Diels-Alder reaction between the diene and dienophile. So people said, aha, what's the solution? We just eliminate those double bonds. Now there will be no diene in the solution. All right. So this is what was done. But the synthetic chemistry of this was a absolute and total disaster. So you generated this extremely complex series of reactions. The Mitsunabu reaction, which involves triphenylphosphine, generates lots of triphenylphosphine oxide, very hard to chromatograph, and then we could do these subsequent reactions with TBDMSCl. We had to activate this group. Now, look at all the minus 78 reactions. So they asked me, what can you do with this, Dr. Churgade? I said, well, I'll have to work on the North Pole, where it is always at minus 78 degrees. And with all these silicon protecting groups, I will be generating a Silicon Valley of the wrong kind. The last step also was dauntingly and irritatingly complex. You had to do 7 recrystallizations to separate the trans and cis and finally come to your product. Now take a look. I mean, people always say necessity is the mother of invention. My theory is always frustration is the mother of innovation. So we got started on it. Remember, in those days, not all the raw materials were available in India, but one thing was L-glutamic acid. We developed a synthesis of this. Now, here came something very nice. I read a nice paper by Professor Stephen Lay, who could activate this derivative by simple substitution reactions, and that turned out to be incredibly great as a contribution. It cemented my personal friendship with Professor Stephen Lay, and I regard him as arguably the best process chemist in the world today, who is still working in academia. So we activated the anomeric group, we reacted it with phenylsulfonic acid, and by the way, the three people in that original paper are all alive, and I'm very much in contact with them. We replaced the silyl protecting groups, and eventually we were able to deprotect with only 1% HCl. So the chemistry started unfolding very nicely. We got the desired trans isomer in 81% yield, and that was certainly much to our benefit. We kept on making these improvements until finally we went to the NCL and IICT in Hyderabad. Why go to these institutions? Well, they had the best and the brightest of chemists at the time. They were all very eager to learn more. So you see the results. I mean, the proof of the pudding is indeed in the eating. So this is the first step that was developed. And some of the people who worked on this project are now fairly distinguished academics in India and all in their own right. I mean, take a look at Dr. Arindam Talukdar, who works in IICB Kolkata, and things like that. He was Susanto Adhikari, who has a distinguished position in University of Tripura and so on. So we were able to do this very nice chemistry. We were completely able to eliminate all traces of the Mitsunabu chemistry, and we found out some very new and encouraging things in the middle. So we found out that we could displace the glycidyl tosylate, which we providentially had in chiral quantities. We could convert this to the five-membered ring lactone. We could do the Krapcho decarboxylation. All these are reactions which are familiar to many people who are just finished their MSc degree, sometimes even earlier. And then we could follow through with this chemistry. What is the point in me telling you this? We outsourced the early, very difficult chemistry to a lab in Switzerland and another in England, and they came back with a price quote of $1.6 million for the first kilo. How much do you think we made this for? We made 1.2 tons at what? $800 a kilo. So the chemistry unfolded in brilliant fashion. We were able to also change the oxygen to sulfur by appropriate simple reactions. This one, Dr. Mukund Gurjar and his gallant people, I will say, they were experts in carbohydrate chemistry. We generated a C2 symmetric intermediate, which we could then cleave. And this was a simple series of reactions. We could telescope them off. Now, my hero in chemistry was always a gentleman called Professor Robert Burns Woodward. When I heard him in India by 1993, he came to address an IUPAC meeting, and he used a word that I found very moving, very personally inspiring. He said, enforced propinquity breeds greater intimacy. Aha, what does that mean? When you force groups to come together, they will react, they will form bonds of friendship or so on. So the whole idea was this was now based on chemistry by Dr. J.S. Yadav. You could abstract this proton, you could generate the alkoxide, and then fold it on itself to generate the five-membered ring that you are seeing here. But lo and behold, the reaction just kept going. We had an acetylide ion, and then with N-butyl lithium, I could go ahead and suggest to Dr. Sista Lalita and her colleague Shashwati Pal, who were working on this project, that oh, lo and behold, you bubble in ethylene oxide and you will come here. Both of these women were then embarking on the USA for distinguished postdoctoral studies, and they remain extraordinarily good at what they do. So we were able to elaborate this into nice synthesis. So time and again I'm making the point for you that we are indeed able to do this very nice chemistry. We were then taking the end group approach, as we called it, and so we figured out some ways of attaching the other points of the molecule. And now today in the world, these molecules are coming back for other uses. And hey, I dare say that we can use this even for testing against COVID and so on and so forth. So the point was well made. The chemistry was profound. There were about a dozen people who got their PhDs on it. There were chemists and chemical directors like GVM Sharma and TV Radhakrishnan and all his team at ICT, and we really came up with something very nice. There were a lot of patents that resulted, and everybody there had India at heart, and they brought together a lot of very exciting chemistry. Now, this was another drug. Again, some of the stories are seemingly very familiar to you now. This was a drug used for asthma and atopic dermatitis. Take a look at the chemistry. I mean, it is just absolutely horrible. What's going on? So the chemistry was so bad that it involved all these ridiculous transformations. I mean, take a look, cupric cyanide, then all these reflux temperatures, and then you had to use phosgene in the end to make not only the substitution product, which was a hydroxylamine, and then you could always get the contaminant of the bisacylurea. Now, we did some simple chemistry. Now, the heroes of this were A.V. Ramarao and, of course, some remarkable people he had in his team at Avra, and that includes Dr. Aminul Islam and all. I treasure my relationship with them, but we started off slow. We were using Indian reagents, and people first scoffed at us. They saying, well, you are going with the cheapest of the raw materials. Well, I said, isn't that exactly what we are supposed to do? But sometimes the attitudes were difficult to change. Now, here is a stroke of genius. People were looking at introduction of iodine with a ridiculously dangerous reagent called iodine monochloride. Imagine you have to sublime iodine into a gas cylinder filled with chlorine, and you get vapors of iodine monochloride, which are extremely lacrimatory, very dangerous for even people nearby. And of course, I hardly need to highlight the dangers of chlorine. We figured out that this is a phenol. We could react that with iodine and sodium hydroxide at room temperature. Hey, what can be simpler than that? And we were able to put into place some nice plans. Now, here is a memorable story in my life. So in the end, we had to piece together these fragments, then reduce the diketone to a diol, which we could then cyclize and then chemically crystallize out the appropriate enantiomer. The results showed that this enantiomer has been produced in 99% yield. Isn't that nice? And then we were all ready. We had practiced this reaction to a T. We started using the reagent diphosgene, which will convert this to an isocyanate, and then we'll be able to attach the hydroxyurea. Now, would you believe it? That is the day India is treating. So with the result that all uses of phosgene and diphosgene were prohibited, and we had to come up with some really new chemistry, which fortunately turned out to be not so difficult. We were able to use para-nitrochloroformate, and we were able to get extraordinary product. Now, these are the things that give you some hassles and keep you awake at night. But remember, this was the time in 2001. The year is particularly important. And the company that gave us this project for outsourcing research collaboration scenario, that company wanted to test these compounds against fetal toxicity. Now, how do you do that? You buy these rats which have been deliberately made pregnant. Then you inject them with these particular compounds. Now, please remember that the gestation period in rats is only 3 weeks. So everybody laid out a timeline. Mukund Churgade, when will the material come here? Well, it will come here on Friday. So then they will clear it through customs and then they will inject it into the rats for their 3-week fetal toxicity study. Alas, I wish things were that simple because the day was September 11, which has been called as 9/11. Everybody in Hyderabad had packed up the material. They had it inspected by the Indian equivalent of the drug regulatory agencies. They made sure that it is what it is and so on. But then all of you are familiar with the disasters of 9/11. So everything was held in quarantine, all flights, all things were completely delayed. Then by mistake, after 1 week, this material got shipped to South Africa. I do not know how. Then it got shipped back to India and so on, with the result that the company in Boston got this material 3 weeks late. Of course, it was too late to use. They had bought these rats and they suddenly found out that they had little 400 little ratlets, born from the pregnant rats. So that is some of the not so glorious things that we managed to do in chemistry. Now, I was visiting Hyderabad a little bit later, and then India used to have a deal with the Russians. It was called Mix for Drugs. India would supply a lot of the bulk drugs. That year, the Russian economy was in a tailspin, and what happened was that trimethoxybenzaldehyde, which is a key component of lot of the sulfametazole, trimethoprim cough syrup, the Russians were not buying. So Chandrababu Naidu was then there, said, we have to get rid of the inventory. So he offered it for free to anybody who finds a good use for it. All of a sudden, believe it or not, we were all having dinner. This was flashing across, and I suddenly realized that the trimethoxybenzaldehyde is the left component, and I can quickly find out from our substitutions, if I move this here and this here, I've got a cheap scaffold which is entirely free, and then this one. So Dr. Aminul Islam literally worked in the lab all night. He says, by golly, I'm going to try it. And 2 days later, he had actually made the molecule. We then presented it to Dr. Hamid, who said he's going to show us how to make this from aspirin. So good ideas come from everywhere. We finally developed this so-called aspirin root, and this it is in all its glory. So you take simple chemically pure aspirin, you then do what is called as a Fries migration reaction on it, and then you can elaborate it to the scaffolds of your choice. All the price targets for these drugs were completely met, and you are seeing some of the chemistry here. The drugs unfortunately did not survive, not because they were bad drugs, but look at the way the whole companies are being restructured and so on. So Cytomed, which I was involved with, got split into two. This was the company that funded the projects, and Cytomed got split into both Procept, and then some part was sent to UCB Pharma. Then the people who were in Procept got sold off, if you will, to Leukocyte. Leukocyte was then acquired by Millennium. Millennium was then acquired by Takeda. Now you see the daisy chain just continues. I had a friend there who said, I worked for 5 different companies in the last 3 years, but I have not left my original desk. So that tells you something of the frustration. But in all and restructuring, these drugs simply did not go ahead past phase 2A. They had passed. But we were able to use all these technologies to publish some nice stuff. We did some the metathesis reactions for synthesis of CMI 977. We made the heteroatom analogs, so we were able to provide the medicinal chemist with the sulfur atom incorporated in place here. We also made the ASA, which turned out to be brilliantly successful, but we also started collaborating with a lot of the distinguished academicians like Professor Eric Jacobson, who invented these Salin complexes. So this chemistry could advance. We were able to make this ultimate molecule again in extraordinarily pure form and yield. So now this was, remember, this was the year 2000, And two, and at that time, the Indian pharmaceutical industry started going through some crisis, and I won't belabor that right now, but you all are familiar with what happened at the then Ranbaxy and all, with the lack of regulatory control and too many impurities and falsifying documents. There has been enough written about it, but that is not something that we all should ever strive to do. So I would encourage everybody to ensure that the best documentation is always maintained. There has been a court case which has stated that if you didn't document it, it did not happen. Now, why was that court case the case? Because the one company, well-known pharmaceutical company, had given a contract to somebody in Chicago to make 2 kilos of this particular drug. The professor had worked on it, put the drug in a bottle, but unfortunately died of a heart attack. So when the Merck people and all that came to look at this, the professor had never kept a lab book. Only one page in the book was written. Step 1, okay. Step 2, okay. Step 3, okay. And now that's not the best way of doing it. Every time I go to a college in India or a university even, I see the words, this reaction was worked up according to the usual procedure. Well, what exactly is that? If I'm the next person who's going to work on the reaction, what is the usual procedure? Don't leave it for me to second guess it or to do some mistakes of my own. Write it down in sufficient detail. Now, most people don't like regulations. This is where Moses comes down from the mount, and all the people are saying, "Oh my God, he thinks he has got the commandments, but what are we doing?" So we exploited a lot of this, the hydrolytic kinetic resolution of terminal epoxides. This is the very famous Salem complex of Eric Jacobson. This technology has now advanced to phenolitic kinetic resolution. Why am I teaching this? Unfortunately, in all these business scenarios, these technologies have never been utilized in India. If you take a look at a lot of our pharma production, every reaction there has not been invented anytime after 2000. Every technology that we are using in India is at least 50 years old. And to me, I feel it is very imperative that we keep our eyes and ears open to new approaches, to new technological innovation, and so on. So, of course, now we can do this with glycidyl tosylate. Gurjar and I, we published something in 97. We could do all these asymmetric beta blockers and all this business. So again, take a look at these slides, but always for all the people in the audience right now, young and old, shy and bold, I think I really want them to keep looking for avenues of new chemistries that they can do to make things not just better, faster, and cheaper, but also, please, ladies and gentlemen, I want it to be safer as well. I want it to be more innovative, and I feel there is a incentive for you to do that, because this kind of entrepreneurship will make you better chemists, more well prepared chemists, and so on. But here are some of the fun stories now. We were going to reduce a chiral, a ketone, which was obviously achiral, and we had to reduce it to a mixture of epimeric alcohols. Now, what would a typical chemist do? You would look for all the chiral borane reducing agents and all. But I came across this wonderful paper by J.S. Yadav, where he had done the reaction with Daucus carota. He had got a mixture of epimeric mix, then resolve, and so on and so forth. Well, what is Daucus carota? It is gajar, it is carrots. And so the people who were working with us from the USA, they said, oh wow, this is a very good green chemistry. So make it, and make us 200 kilos of material. So we can't make 200 kilos in just one big reactor. We said, let's try half a thing first. We calculated that we will require about half a ton of carrots. So after the lab attendants immediately rushed out to go and buy carrots. Within about 2 hours, we were visited by the police. Next day was a festival, and one of the dishes to make, and all the audience members will relate to that. It was obviously what? Gajar halwa and some sweets made of carrots. So they thought we were some idiots who were trying to corner the market and artificially raise the prices. And our attempts to tell them that we are very creative process chemists obviously didn't go very far. Again, we look for new opportunities. I've personally worked in this area, and Dr. Deb Mohapatra in ICT is absolutely wonderful at this one. But take a look, we were tasked with the job of making a new 10-membered macrolide. These are not the easiest species to work with. First of all, they're very rare. But this one we had an incentive because we had a grant from the Gates Foundation to determine the anti-malarial activity, of course, against Plasmodium falciparum and all that. Now this again illustrates creativity at its very, very good. So I was the research director. I had written down a scheme where my colleague, and there was a wonderful graduate student called Dhundi Ramesh in NCL. Our job, it was to assemble this Yamaguchi lactone, protect it with the appropriate protecting group, and of course I was very familiar with the PMB group, paramethoxybenzyl. And then what I had suggested to Dhundi Ramesh to do was to treat this with DDQ, methylene chloride, and of course the Grubbs catalyst and reaction. So he would do a deprotection and then we treat it with the Grubbs catalyst. Now obviously in 2006 I organized a symposium in India where Professor Grubbs was an honored guest. He said, I'll give you some of the catalysts, because he had set up a company called Materia. It was never available in India. But what he immediately got was that this isomer was formed exclusively. Now, even Grubbs had never predicted that one. And he said, wow, I would not have expected that. I would have expected a 50-50 mixture. Now, here is where sometimes it pays well not to listen to a research advisor like me. Because what Dhundi Ramesh did on his own, he said, aha, what if I do the reaction in reverse? What if I do the Grubbs catalyst reaction on olefin metathesis first and then deprotect? Now his yields were not exclusive, but he got the easy isomer in a 90-10 ratio. But it was wonderful because now it told you that you could control the stereochemistry. Remember, now he has got the E isomer as the major one. I had got by my method the Z isomer. This got everybody all excited and people said, oh wow, because now surely the reaction has become very stereospecific. And what is the controlling factor? It is the protecting group, which had never ever been observed. And we could elaborate this to synthesis of desmethylnoninolide and so on. And then you come to the Z isomer exclusively and the E isomer exclusively. All very, very good news. We could synthesize other materials, the decarestrictin and so on. Now we are going to publish something on this one where again we have codified all these rules. We have done molecular orbital and other calculations. So you can see that this is expanding in any other directions. So I was working on this drug for thalassemia. So what is thalassemia? It is a very debilitating disease which people catch when they're 3 years old. Most people do not survive after their 35th birthday, but it involves a very critical iron overload in your system. See, when most of you and I, we eat pomegranates, anar and all that, we don't have a problem with biological iron. But some of these people, it becomes an immediate toxic overload because they are unable to metabolize this. So this was the compound of choice. It was derived from a natural product, and of course the last one with cysteine. So you are seeing some of this chemistry over here. But what is my point? I suddenly got a call from Novartis that we are buying the material, the raw material, at $210 to $225 a kilo in Boston. And we are finding an ad in India where this material is being sold for between $4 to $6 a kilo. And the man laughed. He said, I know you Indians are good in process chemistry, but surely you cannot just overnight reduce the prices. Now, I saw the address of the facility. something immediately struck me, and that was it said near Tirupati temple complex. I don't need to lecture you about what happened next. What happens in Tirupati? There are thousands of devotees who stream through its wonderful portals, all of whom, many of whom, have a ceremonial haircut. And there are about 300 barber shops over there, and men and women, donate their hair as an act of religious piety. Some entrepreneur had figured out that if you can take all these hair and put it in a vat, hydrolyze with hydrochloric acid, you can indeed crystallize out the cysteine hydrochloride. Wow, exciting. At this point, the Food and Drug Administration said, we are going to check out this facility for GMP compliance. I said, oh my God, it's not GMP compliant. They said, do these people maintain resumes and training record? I said, no, they are, yeah, basically they are barbers. And the one guy sweeps up all this hair into a reactor. Well, he's not a well-trained chemist either. But they had to see this. So they did. They loved it, because the final product was being crystallized out and it was extremely pure. At the same time, we met three Orthodox Jews from New York, and we said, "Oh, what brings you here?" He said, "These hair are being exported to New York for making wigs for women." So they were here to certify the facility as well. So there was a lot of humor in those circumstances, but to me, this was a fine example of Indian entrepreneurship. Now, those guys have expanded out their business into hydrolyzing hair from sheep in Africa and in Australia and pulling out the methylcysteine and derivatives that come out. So take a look. This is what a motto of the medieval environmentalist is. If you attacked my castle years ago, then you will get some molten lead and everything poured on you. Now that's where the English word, let me give you a warm welcome, really comes from. One of the things we should strive for, it is valuable to learn from our mistakes. The tricky part is knowing how to make a mistake without doing anything wrong. And my last slide, which is also an example of Indian entrepreneurship. All of you may know the story of Viagra, how it was invented first to treat angina pectoris. Then that clinical trial was an abysmal failure, but then the patients refused to return the sample because and they were having some other fun issues with it, and that is how this drug was developed for erectile dysfunction. Now the inventors of this drug, led by Dr. Campbell, they were all in India, and as every foreign tourist who comes, they want to visit the Taj Mahal. They found one beautiful sign on the highway, and this is what I call India's contribution to this one. The original name was thought to be Niagara, but it said, "Come via Agra, you will see man's greatest erection for a woman." Not the best English you can use, but they're talking about Shah Jahan, Mumtaz Mahal, and the Taj Mahal. Well, here is the entrepreneurship. This 9 million copies of this T-shirt were sold, and this picture showed up in Merck's drug approval process. So with that, I close for the day. I'm very happy to mentor and coach any of you who are interested in learning more about process chemistry. I do this kind of training. It's over about 2 days continuously for several hours a day, at least 6 hours of lecturing. Then we have some workshops and all. But this is an extremely important bit to know. I do this in Cambridge and at Harvard and Rutgers and anybody who can ask. But I think we need to have this because some of this skill base is disappearing. I will ask Dr. Tagde to send you an article by E.J. Corey, who talks about the monumental and very impressive contributions of process chemists, but they are not always been recognized. We have to be very careful to close with my favorite story of addressing a lay audience. One person had said that, oh, did the speaker succeed in conveying their enthusiasm for the field to a broad audience? And one member of the audience said, well, at the beginning, there were two people who knew what the hell he was talking about. One was he, the other was God. At the end, that number has been reduced by at least one. So I hope that has not happened here today. But over to you, Preeti ji. And thank you very much for setting this up.
Can you stop a screen share from your side?
Can I stop the screen sharing?
The same bottom tagline from where you started. At the bottom,
Yeah, I'm looking. Okay, I've stopped the screen sharing now. Are you there? Yeah, I see you now.
uh, it's the chemistry is really like a mystery. So I'm not so much fond of that, but chemistry has its own origin. So it's really a very interesting session. I go very deep and deep and deep, but somehow I'm not of that part of very fond of chemistry. So I'm not getting that much, but I'm just catching the many things. But there are many chemistry lovers who has joined us in this platform, even in Facebook also. So I just want, is anyone have any query? Can you please come up?
So before they ask the question, I would like to say that you may not be fond of chemistry, but you should be fond of chemists.
Yeah.
And you have many people in your Prisal group.
Yeah, exactly. You are also one of the honorary member,
Yeah.
and it's like always been privileged to hear you from your side. Like I heard that you have a discovery on this particular compound and this. So I want you should join and give your advice, your views to many. Dr. Mohsin from Dubai, I think she has joined us, and yesterday she told me, oh, I thought how it's approached towards the practical aspect. Malika, you can join once whatever the test series, whatever the lecture is going to be. Once we are just getting the knowledge, then we are going to perform any of the synthesis, any of the molecule. So it's literally towards the development part. So that also required. And Aditi Banerjee, she is also with us. She write, I am very weak in chemistry. We are just taking one by one questions.
No,
She
no,
writes,
but please have no fear. Let me assuage the fears of people. It's okay to be weak or strong, but as long as there's a determination to succeed, people will succeed. And always look out for avenues. Look forward to learning some new things and reading about new stuff, and then incorporate it into your thinking. Absolutely.
yeah, exactly. I'm just taking questions that she said she has enjoyed your session. Yeah, exactly. In a chemistry session is something like we need to go for a structure activity, reactions, synthetic parts, and which it's somehow quite, boring also. But once like teacher like you and the scientists we are having in this platform, so it's not seems to be any much boring, and people are really very much enlightened by your session. And on a Facebook live also they are just writing very useful knowledge on drug discovery and synthesis. And I just wanted to know that, Dr. Chogade, is there when you are working on any of the compound or any of the development process, so what kind of hurdles you're facing?
Well, the typical development process hurdles are many times the chemistry is extraordinarily difficult. So first thing I do is don't promise anything. I would rather under promise and over deliver. Okay. If I suddenly get a help that can you make it for less than that, is not something I can guarantee you. I will, of course, tell you that I will use all my talents, but not only of myself, but also of my team. So what are the problems that we face? The biggest problem is that some reactions have been designed that are complex and not really translatable to anything real. But the chemistry is very simple. chemists who sometimes design them don't always look for the nice things, shortcuts. Now, I can only suggest to you two things. First of all, always look for the better solvents and all, even in the very beginning. Now, many chemists, even today in India, they are using ether, tetrahydrofuran, and all that. No, all those reactions which require very dry solvents can be done in dimethoxyethane. That is immiscible with water. It has a boiling point of 88 degrees and it just works very nicely. There is no need for you to use a very dangerous one like ether. Many people, especially in the academic and other worlds, get very enamored of butyl lithium. I say, why? Can you not use sodium amide, which just works as well, but which is inherently a lot safer? I've given to you the example of isopropyl acetate. So look for things like that. But always look for designing a new route that will be amenable to manufacturing. And if necessary, amenable to analog design. Many people feel that all they have to do is take the medicinal route and just scale it up. No, look for not just a cosmetic surgery, but a total overturning of all the traditional wisdom, and you will learn a lot from it. But involve everybody in the thought process. Some of the chemists who are actively working in the pilot plants and all, they have a lot to offer. See, you have to remember that, at my level, I was vice president of all drug development at Genzyme. What does that tell you? That I am not necessarily the person standing in the pilot plant because I have so many other meetings and all. So I have to be aware but also open to new ideas and have an open door. Let them also come and ask you the questions. Otherwise, I'll give you a simple example. One day, when I was a younger man, I wrote a procedure which was totally ununderstandable to the operators of the pilot plant. I had 57 kilos of drug sitting on a filter cake,
Okay.
and I wrote there that this has to be washed with distilled and deionized water, which was free from ions by conductometric measurement. Now, this washing was going to take place at 2 o'clock at night, past midnight, in the pilot plant. You think that operator really understood what I was saying? He opened up the big tap. The cake got washed from water from Lake Michigan. So I have treasured the report I got from the analytical chemist the next day, which said your product is contaminated with fish, because that is exactly what had happened. And I didn't know that I had to write in a better way, more. But literally, the fish from Lake Michigan had come on my anti-epileptic drug. And you can imagine what a disaster that was.
It's really, and now people are just hoping how they are just taken from all these conditions. And one question from our participant, Mr. Vivek Yadav, has asked that what is the difference between regiochemistry and regioselectivity in stereocity? Stereocity.
Suppose you have a suppose you have a ring or something like that, and it is not necessarily chiral, right? But you are still finding out reactions to deliver a substituent or something at a specific position. So that is regiospecificity, okay, where the substitution is directed at a specific position. Now, as far as the stereoselectivity goes, you are always generating a chiral material. Suppose you're taking a double bond and epoxidizing that, the epoxides can assume both geometries. So stereospecificity is the art of generating a very specific geometry, and that's where it comes from. So you can make the chiral R enantiomer, you can make the S, and in all its myriad forms. So regio denotes more of a position. The enantio and all that denotes more of a chirality. By the way, feel free to send me some of these questions or a summary of this later on in writing.
Yeah, sure, sure, sure. Sure, we will do that. Whatever the questions just they are asking, because we are just giving them a test series also to the participants. so that they go through all this test series and give their answers. So whatever the questions they have, I can cover up in that session also. And I just wanted to
So you
know.
are not leaking the exam, are you?
No, 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 no. I'm not leaking. I'm not leaking the exam. It's not like that. But first, I can take the queries. What are the queries
No,
they
no, do
have?
that.
After that, we can plan the test series. It's supposed to be like that. How much they are attentive. It's something like that. So I just wanted to know that one question has been asked in a Facebook that how to remove, sir, how to remove non-polar impurities from the compounds.
Non-polar.
So that depends on the comp-
Non-polar is actually easier to do. One of the best ways of doing that and one of the recommended ways is fractional crystallization. And in a small scale, you can do it by chromatography, but on a large scale, you have to pretty much depend on crystallization. Now, some things have changed. When I started in industry, there used to be a gospel truth that you do the fractional crystallization, once or twice, and that works very well. Many of the non-polar impurities remain in the solvents like ethyl acetate and all. Later on, people started using the fluidized bed and all that, chromatography, and that results in larger volumes of solvent being made to literally flow through, and that is very good. Now, today, the most modern innovation is flow chemistry, where you are actually separating by a complex, by attaching HPLCs and all that kind of stuff, but you are ultimately ending up in very pure product. And that flow chemistry is one of the major advances of this century. And so far, it has not found that much of a home in India.
Yeah. Sir, one more thing that's I just wanted to know that how has your approach affected your company, Think Pharma Chicago? So how you are working and what are your like projects you are undergoing and what products they have, something.
Think Pharma is basically geared towards discovering drugs through traditional Indian medicine.
Exactly the whole.
I've already shared with you on the slide the example of noninolide. That
Huh.
material comes from India, actually, and that the whole chemistry was done from India. Now, I'll give you another example that we are always looking for better sources of materials, but more important, if we have to scale it up, how best to do it. So, the government of South Africa promulgated that they are all going to focus on a plant called Hoodia carinii. What was unique about Hoodia? When the African people, and this time the examples were drawn from South Africa, they were drawn from Madagascar, and they were drawn from Mozambique. When these people were tired far from home, they always chew on the glabrous roots of this plant called Hoodia. And so people observed that they don't feel so hungry anymore. And then they are able to get home and in 1 hour or whatever, and they are not so hungry. So then there's hopefully a dinner waiting for them at home. Now everybody got very excited about this because everybody used to say, oh, I don't feel hungry, I'm feeling full. But that had a new mechanism called satiety. It is not like treating with a pill and saying our stomach, stapling your stomach or anything like that. Now, what was the difficulty with this? The difficulty was that this plant only grows 6 inches every 12 years. So that's not sustainable. So now we actually have worked with people in India. We have found a nice computer program where we do a cross correlation. We have found a plant with similar sugars and sterols, which is called Caralluma fimbriata, which grows in Tamil Nadu, in Madhya Pradesh, in Maharashtra. Now that grows 12 inches a year. So you can see how our thinking has changed. We want to isolate the components. We want to do the genotypic assays and all that. But we will see if these sugars and any hybrid molecules we can make from these are satisfying the same purpose, and that is affecting. So it will be leading to new drug discovery.
Okay. Sir, as already we had one session on the entrepreneurial green chemistry. So that's also one of the interesting part.
Yes, absolutely.
So with that connectivity, what message you wanted to give to all the participants who are connected on this platform or in the social media, other platforms?
I would say be entrepreneurial. See, when I started in industry, everybody wanted to work for a pharma or something and retire after 35 years or 40 years. Now all our world has changed around us. But look for these small innovative pathways, write a business plan, write some proposals, and then go with that. And I think there is room for doing this even in academia. Take a look at Indian academia. We do some inventive work, we isolate some molecules, but once we determine the IC50, everything remains in a bottle or a vial, and then nothing happens from it. We have to effect a better correlation between academia, industry, and government. No ifs, ands, and buts about it, but people can be very instrumental in trying to think of new innovative processes and all that and pushing them through, trying to help raise funds and all that. And we have all kinds of teaching geared for exactly that.
Exactly. What happened? We need to work on our writing skills, our research, and make ourselves, perfect in one of any of the particular sector, whatever the so. Then only we can move toward when we can strengthen ourselves with full of knowledge and other basic concepts. Once we have base has been clarified, then only we can move from base to the entrepreneurial development. That is very much needed, because if I think I just jump in a chemistry part, that's it's not a very much easy task. I have to start with the basics. So thank you, Dr. Chogade. So it's really very nice session we have, and it's always a pleasure to hear from your side. And you have given your valuable time. That makes my day. It's night here, but it's like okay. I'm very happy you are connected with us.
No, absolutely. And we should begin this movement to literally use the training that people are getting, not just from me, but from the other scholars over there. It should not be just that कि चोरगाड़े साहब का भजन हो गया है, now we'll go home because we people have to start incorporating all this bauddhics that we have been giving. Again, not just me, but other people as well.
Yeah. With these words, I just wanted to share that a token of you know as we are like in a virtual platform. I am very much honored.
I like the slide, but also can you send me a copy of those two slides that you made? Maybe this third one also.
Yeah, definitely, it's for you only. I would like to say that thanks for sparing your valuable time in our advanced training program first day, and it's really very much knowledgeable session. And hope we have its complete recording session in our YouTube channel also, and it's live on Facebook, and we are getting very much positive feedback that people are very much like interested, they learn something from your session. So
So
यही
send
हम
me some of the comments, but also a link to the Facebook once the recording is done, because I like to keep these and improve on myself, you know.
definitely I'll just do that. No issue.
Please do that.
No issue. Thank you so much, sir. uh,
Thank you again. Yes.
yes,
And
thank
this was delightful.
thanks to I just wanted to thanks to all the participants for their time. And tomorrow we have session on HPLC by Mr. Murari. He is having practical command on how we can perform HPLC and complete practical approach towards. And then the timing will be same. So be connected. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm exiting now. Thank you.